All right, ladies and gentlemen, and it's now time to begin on the discussion that's on innovation and resilience in payments. So before we move forward to the fireside chat, I would first like to invite Governor of Denmark National Bank, Mr. Ulrik, on stage for the keynote. Could we have a huge round of applause as Mr. Ulrik joins us on stage here?
Thank you. Hello. Very happy to be here. Indeed honored to speak at this great festival. And also in that way reflecting sort of the respect that we have also in Denmark for Indian Fintech in particular. So what I wanted to do in these first 3 minutes is really to talk about resilience in payments and how that interacts with new technologies. And I'm trying here to change the slides with apparently not very successfully. If there's somebody out there who would know what to do, that would... Oh, here we are. So what I want to say a little bit about is how is payment done today and what can we then do about increasing the resilience of that system. That is essentially the agenda for the next couple of minutes.
We're just getting another one.
Okay. Okay, so what I wanted to present here is how does payment actually look in Denmark right now and what has happened over the years. And one of the striking features about it is, of course, that cash is not very prevalent anymore. The market share, if you could call it that, is less than 10%, so less than 1 in 10 transactions is done by cash. And that brings upon the point that if you want to create a resilient system, you cannot assume that we can just revert to cash because the cash infrastructure isn't really there to be able to handle that. So we need to think of resilience in a digital manner. That's sort of the first takeaway. Switch.
Yeah.
Perfect.
I have a backup for you, the green button.
Yes, thank you. And the second input to thinking about resilience is this slide on the left here, where we have seen the pick-off of use of Apple Pay and Google Pay in Danish retail payments have been very significant. So now it's more than 35% that is done using Apple Pay or Google Pay. And that's pretty important because it means that we cannot base ourselves on people having their physical plastic card and their PIN code when they go to stores, because we actually do have some solutions offline for that. We need to think about scenarios where people only bring their phone when we think about how to create a resilient digital system. Change of slide, please. All right, there we are. And of course, I come from the Nordic-Baltic region, where, as you can probably imagine, there's a lot of focus on geopolitical risk, there's a lot of focus on hybrid warfare, cyber attacks, and so on. So it's really high on the agenda. And what we've been pushing now, and I'll present two solutions we're working on, and the first one, and I would say probably the most important one, is essentially a sort of offline card solution. And it's what we've said, we want to start by looking at all the national grocery chains that they have this available. It can work if the internet is down, it can work for up to a week. There's capacity in the terminals involved here, so the Danes can go out and get food and drinks and so on in an emergency situation. And essentially the technical solution is the one that you use when you fly and you flip your card 10 kilometers up in the air. It's called deferred authorization. So essentially the transaction is stored, and then when there's connectivity coming back, you run the transaction through. That's essentially sort of the technical solution. And just this Friday, the first of the large nationwide grocery chains rolled it out. It will be rolled out in the rest of them, and then hopefully, and this is our recommendation to retailers in general, is to adopt this solution more generally. So that is one way of creating resilience. The other, change of slide please. The other solution is really to think about what you could call diversification. So essentially, we have a system that is extremely based on the card system, the Visa, the MasterCard, and we also have a national card called Dankortet. But really, what we would like to maybe is to have a completely different set of rails. And there we have, I know you're very familiar with account-to-account instant payments in India. We also have a very successful account-to-account instant payment system in Denmark, but it only nowadays work as a sort of peer-to-peer if you want to send money to your sister or your family or whatever, but it's not having a large market share out in the physical stores. And we want to essentially promote that. And this summer we had a breakdown on this strange figure which shows sort of the number of transactions going through our instant payment schemes on 4 different Saturday nights. And of course, one night stands out, and that was a Saturday night where for 3 hours the card-based rails were down. And so you could see that there was a substitution over to instant payments. And so essentially the point we are making is that these shops that had available a point-of-sale account-to-account solution, they avoided having losses on their revenue and their turnover this Saturday night because they had this, let's call it, reserve trails. And we want to broaden that, so we want to have a card-based system, we want to have an account-to-account-based system for physical stores, and when one is down, you can switch to the other. That's really our ambition. Change of slide, please. Perfect. When we then think ahead, of course, this is a much more general point. Clearly, there are things happening in the CBDC space. We could get back to that maybe in a few minutes in the fireside chat. There are things happening with stablecoins. But I think the general point that I want to emphasize today is essentially that we want to, whether or not it's one or the other that we'll end up using, we want it to be resilient. We want there to be offline facilities, because this is the new reality really, that we need to think very hard not only about usability, efficiency, but we also want to think hard about having resilience in the payment system. Thank you so much. That would be my introductory remarks. Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Mr. Ulrik. It's lovely to have you here and also share your thoughts. And in fact, that was the keynote, ladies and gentlemen. And the topic of discussion continues to be on innovation and resilience in payments. In fact, now we're going to have a very, very pertinent discussion happening right here on the stage, and that's going to be a fireside chat. And I'm sure all of you can see the stage get that quick makeover. I would soon request Mr. Ulrik to join us on stage first. Yes, sir. Request you to kindly take your seat and join us on stage. And ladies and gentlemen, could we have a huge round of applause as I now invite Mr. Dirk, Managing Partner of BEENEXT, joining us today.
Thank you. Oh, thank you very much, Ulrik. So, for those of you who have never heard of myself, maybe very briefly, I run a venture capital firm called BEENEXT. We have been fortunate to invest in India over the last 10 years, have around 150 companies invested here. And the thing that connects me with Mr. Nødgaard or Ulrik is Copenhagen. I met my wife in Copenhagen, even though I'm from Germany. Thank you so much for the perspective from a European point of view. I have been fortunate to observe really the journey of India, especially since the initiation of Aadhaar and the India stack here. And it's fascinating to observe how regulators think in different parts of the world. When you think about roles of central banks evolving with the onset or as payments become a lot more digital, instant, and borderless, how do you think, what does that mean for the regulator's role? Would love to hear your opinion and elaboration.
Well, thank you, Dirk. So I think in the traditional role has, of course, been providing the rails, so let's call it that. Really having the gross settlement systems working beneath it all. We also pushed instant payment rails in Denmark like 11 or 12 years ago. But of course, there are also broader things that we look into, and I think the first one is, of course, efficiency. And there, for instance, just to give a flavor, I think in Denmark, and I think this goes for many countries, like when you look nationally, the payment system are sort of pretty okay. I mean, they can be better and they can be improved. But when you then think about cross-border payments, all of a sudden you see, a lot of frictions, a lot of costs, a lot of burdensome things to do if you want to do that. And so this is, just to give a flavor, one where we are actively pushing now. We have joined the ECB in using their platform for our gross settlement system, but also our instant payment system. And essentially what we're exploring now, that we actually have 3 currencies on the same platform. So we have the euro, we have the Danish kroner, we have the Swedish kroner. So right now we are exploring and building a system that can do cross-currency instant transactions. And here our role is not only to, again, provide the rates, but also maybe to push a little bit the banks to adopt this and get used to it. And being in India, I should say that the long sort of horizon of this project is very much to think about how to expand. If we make it work within Europe, then expand that globally. And India is up there on top of the list in thinking of where would it be relevant to think about being able to make easier cross-currency payments, also with a view to remittances and all this. I think there's a potential strong use case there. So that was really about efficiency. And then, as I was just talking about, the thing that has moved up clearly to the top of the list is resilience. How can we make these systems work even more resilient? We can maybe get back to that. But I think, at least coming from the sort of Nordic Baltic region of Europe now, it is up there as number one.
Interesting. I think you touched on a good point, right? Like interoperability, real-time settlement. Looking at sort of the journey of UPI, right? The volumes are mind-boggling, especially if you compare it to, let's say, a Visa that has been around for 46 years, and here comes UPI, and in 10 years, amazing, has similar transaction count, if not higher by now. It brings about, though, like a new genre of responsibility, especially with regards to, the real time, you can't undo it, cyber risk, fraud, etc. Like what is the regulator doing about these topics, or like how is it guiding the private sector to invest in it? We are seeing a lot of challenges here in India and in other parts of the world because this is new territory.
Yeah. So for our part, I would say our top focus there is really on the cybersecurity part of it. I mean, there are other authorities thinking a lot about how to combat fraud, and which is clearly a thing in a digital system. But in terms of cybersecurity, clearly we've been doing that actually together with the sector. I would say clearly we sort of maybe pushing a little bit from time to time, but I think it's very much a joint effort, and we started some years ago on that now, making all the systemic institutions in Denmark hire ethical hackers, trying to see if they can get inside the systems. But I think our focus now is shifting. So it's really on going from what you could call prevention, making sure you're not sort of taken down, to recovery. And there we have what we could call traditional recovery. If one data center fails, you can switch. But I think we are really moving to the next step in that line, which is really what we call disaster recovery. Telling banks and other financial institutions to look at what we call extreme but plausible scenarios, which is those where you're both your data centers out, and all of a sudden you're basically taken out of business, at least for a while. And there we are pushing strongly for having what we call as a working title, a sort of emergency bank solution, that you somewhere have completely unconnected to your day-to-day bank business. You have a shadow bank in the drawer, somewhere, and then in another place you have the most recent data on all your clients. And then if there is this very severe breakdown, you can take out the shadow bank, you can combine it with last night's data on all your clients, and you can, and that's what we need to develop, basically get your bank up and going in not too much time. So that's really top of mind now, I would say.
When you say shadow bank, does that involve cash as a last resort of safety if there's really like a black swan event?
No. This is a digital part of things that, you know, transactions can go through. You can transfer money. A few words on cash, which is, as I was showing, I mean, cash is clearly not a huge thing in Denmark, but it is part of our recommendations to Danes to have a little bit of cash lying there. We have looked at, as some of you may know, there was a complete blackout in the southern part of Europe earlier this year. And we've looked sort of quite in detail into what happened there, what are the lessons to be learned. And I think one of the lessons I took away from that is sort of humility, in the sense of saying we cannot foresee all kinds of scenarios that would happen. So our recommendation is to say, even though our main track is, when we talk about resilience, is digital resilience, but we do have a recommendation that people just keep a little bit of cash for that occasionally breakdown.
Yeah. I mean, when I speak to our investors and they ask us about regulatory challenges, I sometimes joke that in investing in India, I sometimes joke that the biggest competitor for us is the regulator, because they're so innovative, right? But often it's in collaboration with the private sector. What do you see in terms of private sector, public sector collaboration to address some of the main challenges that you mentioned?
Well, we probably have a different take. I mean, we would like the banks to be out there doing the specific solution. As I said, we are happy to provide the rails on which they can operate and so on. That's and then from time to time, as right now with the cross-currency payments, we of course push as we can, but we are not trying to substitute for, you know, private initiative or anything like that. There might be a different approach in other countries, as you are alluding to, but that's not really the approach we're taking. In general, I would say about public-private partnerships, I think a lot of these agendas are really suitable for that, and I think, so for instance, this offline solution I presented earlier with the cards, is essentially a solution where we brought into the same room the card companies, the large retailers, the banks, and said, we need to come up with something that would work here. And we haven't done it through legislation, you know, we just said, come on guys, we need to solve this one. And I think there was I mean, of course, there's always pushbacks, but in overall, there was a very positive attitude. And for instance, as you can probably imagine, when you do an offline scheme where you can go on for several days, there's a credit risk attached to that. And essentially that sits with the retailers, but the banks stepped in and said, we'll take 50% of that just to make the solution balanced. So that's the way I think we in many ways like to do it in Denmark. But when it comes to sort of really developing solutions, we are probably a bit more hesitant. I mean, this is also a discussion we see in Europe on the digital euro. Is it just providing rails, or is it more than that? That's an ongoing discussion. I won't solve that here. But just to say, I mean, there are certain there's a spectrum of different approaches here, I think.
I think the digital euro is maybe an interesting segue into looking into the future.
Yeah.
You know, we have like sort of the US pushing for a stable coin economy. There's a digital euro. If you close your eyes at night and you think 5-10 years out, what do you think about? What are the big topics, the big trends, and partially hopes maybe, partially sort of things you see a little bit more clear on the horizon? What is it?
So if you start with the hopes, I mean, I certainly hope in 5 years' time we can see real significant progress in this cross-currency dimension. I mean, there's a specific project there. It will take time for sure, but I hope that will deliver results. Then there is these, as you say, there are two very big things out there right now in the world. There's the CBDC track, which is what Europe is maybe moving ahead with. Then there's the stablecoin thing, which seems to be at least very much in focus in the US. But of course, there is also, let's remember that, there's a lot of talk about the Genius Act of the US government in the stablecoin dimension. But let's remember there is a regulation in Europe that is actually in many respects quite similar. It's called the MiCA, about setting up a sort of regulatory blue stamp for stablecoins, of course with a view to euro-denominated stablecoins. It has the same flavor. Just let's recall that. Of course, there are differences. I mean, in the European regulation, it's written in, I would say, very clear language that if a stablecoins all of a sudden starts to affect monetary policy or financial stability, the authorities have pretty strong instruments to put a brake on it. But coming back to the CBDC, I think it is clearly an interesting prospect. I think in many ways it's driven by this fact that within the Eurozone you don't really have cross-border payments flowing freely, even though they have the same currency within those countries. I think that's maybe at least one of the differences in understanding why we haven't moved in the same direction as of yet. I think the other one is that, for instance, something that is lagging, at least in some of the very large Eurozone countries currently, is a peer-to-peer instant payment scheme. We have that in Denmark, it's working, and the penetration rate is pretty high. So we don't have the same need here now, but we are certainly following that project quite closely, and we've done a deal with the ECB that they are doing this platform they're doing for the digital euro. They're doing it what we call multi-currency. So essentially it can work also on the Danish kroner. So if in a few years' time we think there might be a use case for adopting a digital kroner, we can essentially go down to Frankfurt and plug in the Danish kroner, and then we'll be up and running. So simplifying things a little bit here. But and I think this sort of, I wouldn't say competition, but it's going to be very interesting to see for the next 5 years how will this play out. Stablecoins, CBDCs. And then I maybe want to highlight a third avenue, maybe to think about something we also engaged with together with the ECB, which is all this, what you would typically call wholesale CBDCs. That is the idea of having securities being tokenized and settled on the chain. And of course, as central banks, we would like the cash leg of those transactions to come from central banks in order to ensure monetary policy is working as it should be. So there we're exploring that possibility together with the ECB. And it's very interesting because there's also a completely different sort of, whereas I think it's fair to say that the digital euro from the banking side, there's a lot of pushbacks, a lot of different opinions and so on, and also a little bit of tension, I guess. Whereas this wholesale thing is really sort of everybody is united in thinking about, can we actually do this? This is probably a few years down the road before you will see the sort of overall unified ledger with all the securities on the chain and but there's also a shorter term project which is really about building a bridge between a DLT system for securities and then building a bridge back to the normal system of central bank money. And that can actually be done within a reasonable horizon. That's pretty realistic, pretty operational project. We are, as I said, under the leadership of the ECB working on that, and hopefully that can be done in 2 or 3 years' time, something like that. So that, I think, is sort of if we look ahead for 5 years,
Yeah. Maybe differently put on the last question, like if you draw inspiration from other ecosystems, what ecosystems inspire you currently globally on the financial stability, resilience? Where do you draw as a regulator inspiration, both from a design principle but also from a regulatory framework?
Let me just start by saying, I think I alluded to that in the speech, but just to make it clear, in this world where cybersecurity is really up there on top of the list, we took a decision some years ago to actually move the whole settlement system, we have the instant payment rails, we have to move that to Frankfurt to the ECB. So clearly, I mean, we see that as the leader in Europe in terms of providing the rails. I would say, talking about resilience, there is actually a Nordic neighbor that we look kind of much to, and that is Finland. As some of you who are more familiar with the geography of the Nordic Baltic region, Finland has a 1,300 kilometers borderline with Russia and also have some war experiences there. So I think it's fair to say they are ahead of the pack when it comes to thinking about resilience pretty broadly in their society, but also when it comes to the financial sector. So for instance, this emergency shadow bank solution I was alluding to before, there we do find inspiration in what the Finns have been doing in that dimension. So I think that's actually where our focus is right now. As I said earlier on, one of the other ambitions we have is to have account-to-account based payments out there also in the physical stores. And I mean, clearly here India is a place to look. I mean, it is quite impressive, as you also said, this UPI system. And essentially what we would like is to have a balanced system in Denmark where this is a UPI-like 50% market share and a card-based system, so we can switch back and forth. That would be ideal, I think.
Interesting. I think it's fascinating from the outside to observe the different philosophies of regulators. So we're coming to the end of the panel. Thank you so much, Ulrik Nødgaard. Please, a round of applause. Thank you for taking the time, and this was very insightful. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, gentlemen. May I request you to come to the center of the stage just for a quick photograph together, please? Yes.